For better and worse, this talk is fairly heavily scripted because of the time constraints. Hi, I'm Jeremy Tirrell from UNC Wilmington. Go Seahawks. My hacky title here alludes to the fact that although much of this panel discusses using bodily practices as rhetorical praxis, I want to talk about the body itself as an equivalent material agent. So our goal is an insight into how bodily actions can influence rational human agents, but rather a more nuanced understanding of the bodily actions activated in gameplay situations. So commonly the body materializes or doesn't in video gaming in a few general ways. It's negated in contrast to real physical outside activity. It's a subject or means of violence, potentially inspired by gaming, or it's the material reflection of an idealized in-game avatar, particularly regarding identity factors such as gender, race, and sexual orientation. These topics are being explored through scholarly research and rhetoric, as well as psychology, sociology, media and gender studies, queer theory, and many other fields. They're also well represented in the popular press and broader conversations about society. But I'd like to talk to you instead about something else, three related rhetorical frames of anatomical emergence. These aren't discrete categories and I'm not building a taxonomy. These are ways to view aspects of gaming as a bodily practice. So let's look at some material in the wild here. The renewed virtual reality and augmented reality pushes, the dissemination of what Jesper Juhl in the Casual Revolution terms mimetic interfaces, the ubiquity of touch interfaces in smartphones and tablets, as well as dedicated gaming hardware. Haptic controller elements such as rumble or force feedback and axis orientation, right? And the rise of social motion gaming, like dance games, rock band, and its ilk. So this kind of bodily invocation isn't a recent development. The early history of video games was a process of ascertaining how bodies and hardware would interact. So early games like Computer Space, the first commercial arcade game, I mean, if you look at that interface, it's shocking perhaps. Pong, hi Pong. Golden Age titles like Marble Madness and its trackball, Paperboy with the bike handlebar interface. And as hardware has become accessible and cheap, there's been a current resurgence of playfulness and exploration in experimental controllers. You know, the stuffed animal and tennis ball with butt-sniffing pugs, Rez's trance vibrator, the faux Stalinist interface of VEC-9, and even hacked-together IKEA furniture, and this is just a small sampling. So one way to interpret all this is through the rhetorical lens of the agon, the classical concept that invokes elements gathering into an emergent entity. In Bodily Arts, Debbie Hawley says that in the name and spirit of the agon, bodies not only came together, they became bodies capable of action and hence identity formation. Hawley points out that the agon is more than the one-on-one sparring that is emphasized in most treatments of the topic. The Greeks used the term athleos to represent such outcome-driven contests, right, athletics. The root of agon is gathering or assembly. Agora shares the same derivation, and similarly, agon emphasizes the event of the gathering itself, the contested encounter, rather than strictly the division between opposing sides. So, excuse me, I'm saying there's a public, there's a social aspect to this, but it's a society that includes a parliament of material objects and other non-Cartesian agents. It's through agonism that bodies and machines materialize as such. And Hawley points out that classically identity was tied to acts or agency rather than essence, so it's in a sense rhetorical rather than philosophical. So the emphasis on act and gathering underscores that there's a performative aspect here that invokes publics with commensurate effects. So I want to turn to our second frame by looking at some more material. This is In Tune, a game about bodily interaction and consent, and it's actually controlled through skin contact that closes electrical circuits. How do you do it is a game about human sexuality through the lens of assumed naivete. You can see the dolls being smashed together. Robbie the robot here, it aids autistic children with social interaction through face matching. This is a prototype game about dealing with Ebola, the contagious body, safely and properly. So I want to suggest that these are epididactic. They're assertions about shared ways of being. We can go further by looking at games for health, which is a subset of what are sometimes called serious games. Some of these seem purely biologically focused. This is Soda Drinker Pro. which works with this brace input to help stroke patients regain dexterity. Dig Rush, it helps correct what's commonly called lazy eye. The Skia Kegel peripheral here, it gamifies pelvic floor exercise. This is Packy and Marlin. This is a Super Nintendo era game about managing juvenile diabetes. But there are also other games that address, I think importantly, what we might call emotional concerns, right? Deep uses a chest monitor, like a halter monitor, and virtual reality now to inculcate mindful breathing. Tetris has been used to treat PTSD by interfering with memory reconsolidation. Final Girls deals with trauma therapy. Project Evo here actually is a video game to treat cognitive disorders like ADHD and depression. So what we see here is how Hexus, the unified body and mind complex, becomes conditioned and defined by transformation, a Gorgian metasto toward an ethic. Games reveal whispered enthymemes half implying this is how you should be. And we can see the material negotiation that occurs in that way. Transformation occurs to all agents, too. It's not that one thing stays static and everything else must adjust. And it's not a two-way street. Transformation is distributed through agents, right? In this case, bodies, machines, code, protocols, norms, whatever. For example, the one I mentioned in Tune, it isn't uniformly didactic. There aren't set answers about what constitutes appropriate consent. That's negotiated by all of the agents, right? Human and non. But the materialism of this may be most evident in adaptive controllers. Even the language of that adaptive reveals the importance of metasto or transformation, changing to find equilibrium. But crucially, accommodation is shared by biological availability, mechanical operation, game code, cultural expectations, and so on. But of course, these are examples that are specialized in medical and thus, in a sense, peripheral. But that's exactly the point. Remember We Fit, which I'm sure some of us are familiar with, or the voice of the physician, doctor's orders, play video games, right? I mean, there's a line between what's deemed a medical issue and its correction and what's encouraging hegemony. And this virtual medicalization brings us to our last frame, which we might call contested bodies, wherein the body expands to become both a virtualized zone of conquest and a trophy. T. Kenny Fountain's Rhetoric in the Flesh is instructive here, as he references an anatomy professor in his study who describes the body as a challenging space to enter because, like a circle or enclosed process, it has no clear point of entry. We can see this in examples like this is Microsurgeon, an early television title. Second there is the Life and Death series. Sorry. More recently, we have things like the Trauma Center collection. And so we can enter these things, and yet bodily space simultaneously moves in a contradictory way as the magic circle is extended through the protective televisual screen and into the player's body. We can see how that operates in things like Remission 2 and Ben's Game. These are both games for cancer patients about fighting your cancer from within. And there's something of Haughey's Athleos in that. The contested body becomes utterly winnable, right? The body is something that can be won. And there's something of, there's no consoling here of the inevitably doomed. There's only combat and acquisition. So I've only got a few seconds remaining in this brief and coarse overview, but I think we can see some different ways in which material anatomies are being rhetorically enacted, regulated, and disputed through video game play. All right, thank you. 8 minutes.